Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the fifth annual Wild Places, Wild Faces event. I'm Trevor Haldane, and sitting next to me is my dad, Scott Haldane, and we are delighted to have you here.
As usual, folks, and welcome everyone. Thanks very much for your interest and for your support. As usual, we are dedicating this to my dad and Trevor's granddad, Gib Haldane. He was such a fan of the outdoors and a great wealth of knowledge for Trevor and I. Had a huge influence on us and sparked our love of nature. And we really want to recognize my dad, Trev's granddad, once again.
Tonight's presentation is a fundraiser for the Trans Canada Trail. And when we started this thing 5 years ago, it felt like a very apt charity partner because we're a father and son that are living on opposite ends of Canada, but this is a trail that literally connects us. And if you live in Canada, there's a very good chance this trail is right near your house because it goes from coast to coast to coast through all of the territorial and provincial capitals, and it's the longest trail in the world. So we're delighted to pair with them again, and thank you for those of you who have donated. Now, to hear a little more, I'm going to hand over the mic to Linton Carter, who works with the Trans Canada Trail, and she'll tell you a bit more.
Thank you, Trevor, and hello, everybody. I'm just going to get my notes up here. Perfect. Thank you all for joining us for the fifth annual Wild Places, Wild Faces event. And I'm very pleased to be here. This is my second year with you. And tonight's event is a very important date in Trans Canada Trail's Blaws to Oz campaign. Blaws to Oz is our annual winter wellness campaign, this year presented by Manulife, encouraging Canadians to get outside on the trail to experience the health and wellness benefits of being active in the winter, to turn those winters Blaws into Oz. And I hope after tonight's event, you will all feel inspired to get outside and experience the beautiful trails and nature across Canada. You all know Scott and Trevor are incredible nature photographers, but they're also great friends of the Trans Canada Trail, and we've been fortunate enough to work with them on this wonderful event for 5 years now. We're delighted to welcome them back this evening. On behalf of Trans Canada Trail, we deeply appreciate your support for both Wild Places, Wild Faces, and our mission. For anyone who may not know, and Trevor just mentioned it, we're the longest multi-use trail system in the world at nearly 30,000 kilometers, reaching every province and territory and connecting all three of Canada's coastlines. As an organization, our mission is to lead, develop, and steward an accessible nationwide system of connected urban and nature and rural trails. We do this by providing organizations across the country with leadership and guidance, funding and resources, and outreach and engagement. And this would not be possible without the support of generous donors and partners like all of you and like Scott and Trevor. A few key reminders before we begin. The chat is open for comments and questions throughout the presentation. We'll be collecting questions for the Q&A session at the end. Participant videos and microphones will remain off during the presentation, and the session is being recorded. You'll receive the recording in the coming days so you can watch it again and share it. If you experience any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat, and our colleague Kelly will assist you as quickly as possible. And a big thank you to those of you who have already donated to support the trail. For those who haven't yet had the chance, we will share the donation link in the chat for your convenience. Before we pass it back to Scott and Trevor, our CEO, Mathieu Roy, would like to say a few words of introduction and thanks. Over to you, Mathieu.
Merci, Linton. Bonsoir. Good evening, everyone. As you just heard, my name is Mathieu Roy, and I am the Chief Executive Officer at Trans Canada Trail. It's so exciting to be here tonight for the fifth annual edition of the Wild Places, Wild Faces. Thank you, Scott and Trev, to be such a great friend of Trans Canada Trail. Since 2021, the Wild Places, Wild Faces fundraiser has raised over $25,000 towards Trans Canada Trail, and we are extremely grateful. This kind of generous support from people like Scott and Trevor and donors across the country is what allows us to continue to provide funding, resources, expertise, advocacy for trails across the country. Last year alone, TransCanada Trail invested more than $11 million to ensure the sustainability of our trail, our treasure connecting Canadian to nature. This June, TransCanada Trail is hosting the first ever Canadian Trail Summit in Winnipeg. This will be a truly unique opportunity for Canada trail sector to come together to ensure that the trail remains sustainable, inclusive, resilient, but more essential, this gem for generation to come. None of what we do would be possible without the community of generous supporters. So far, before I pass it to Scott and Trevor, I'd like to thank you all for being with us tonight and to support the trail. To celebrate the 5-year of Wild Places, Wild Faces, we are honored to have an anonymous donor who stepped forward to match all donations made to our event tonight up to $5,000. We have had a lot of great responses so far, so please make a gift if you haven't yet. Thank you once again, Scott and Trevor, for your passion, creativity, and to all of you for being here tonight, and to everyone who make this event possible. So back to you, Scott and Trevor. I cannot wait to see the scene and wildlife you have captured this year. Thank you very much.
All right, we're back here. Now, thank you very much, Mathieu. Thank you, Linton. It is a great partnership, and we're really happy to be back with the Trans-Canada Trail. As Mathieu mentioned, we have raised in the 5 years that we've been involved over $25,000, which we're delighted about. We're very confident by the time the dust settles on tonight's presentation that we'll go over 30,000 actually cumulatively since we started. So thank you for your generosity. As we have done in the last couple of years, Trevor and I will offer our digital images for sale with 50% of the proceeds going to the Trans-Canada Trail. So if there are any images that you see during the presentation tonight that you would like to have for yourself to hang in your home or to give as a gift, please let us know. We will share our emails at the end of the presentation. Please let us know. We'll go through the contact sheet with you and you can pick out your favorite images.
Now, as I mentioned, we're a father and son living on opposite ends of the country. I'm living in Fernie, BC, which is tucked in the southeast corner of BC, so very near the Alberta and the Montana borders. And this is the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa people, who have set an example for land stewardship that we all need to work a lot harder to live up to their example.
And most of my photographs are taken in the Ottawa-Gatineau area where I live. And I'd like to recognize that the area in which I capture most of my wildlife photographs is the unceded, unsurrendered traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, who have been the customary keepers of the land and the Ottawa River watershed called Kitchissippi for millennia. I honor their history, stewardship, and ongoing presence while also acknowledging the legacy of and continuing impact of colonialism and the need for us to commit to reconciliation with all Indigenous peoples. So here we go. So winter, I love the first day of the new year. It really gives me an opportunity to get out and welcome the new year, but also wonder, what am I going to see? What is going to be my first wildlife sighting of the year? And the most important question, will it make the cut for the Wild Places, Wild Faces show? And in fact, in 2025, the first critter I saw was this little American mink hiding under a shelf of ice and turning to greet me on New Year's Day. And he did make the cut, which is wonderful. When the temperatures drop, snow covers the ground and ice forms on the river, most of the wildlife either leaves or goes to sleep, but not the resident mud lake mallards. We have a flock of probably 200 or 300 mallards that overwinter. They're attracted by the open water and, unfortunately, human-sourced food. And these mallards, with a few American black ducks mixed in, overwinter right here on the Ottawa River. And on this particular day, the traffic was pretty heavy on the Ottawa River Parkway. While most of the birds have gone south, there are some hardy species that spend the winter in Ottawa-Gatineau, like the multitudes of black-capped chickadees, the stunning male northern cardinal, and a lifer for me. Now, a lifer is bird nerd terminology for seeing a bird for the first time. And in my case, I only count it if I've actually gotten a photograph. This is the aptly named red-headed woodpecker, beautiful bird, using its tail, its stiff tail feathers, as a brace against the tree to dig just a little bit deeper. Now, while there are fewer animals in the winter, the good news is that those that stick around are much easier to spot, and especially exciting during the winter with no foliage on the trees is to spot the raptors. Like this Merlin falcon standing out against the white winter sky and bracing before takeoff. Or this Cooper's hawk really puffed up against the cold, filling its feathers with air so that it has a warm cushion of air against the cold. And the very similar sharp-shinned hawk, this one came right down to eye level, which is rare for a raptor, and gave me an opportunity to get a good close-up photograph. I just love the gorgeous ice formations in the winter. This frost-covered plant on a really cold day looks like it's sprouted feathers. Now, this year, I broke a streak that's a questionable claim to fame. I had never missed a Super Bowl since 1967. That's 58 years in a row. But in a burst of Canadian patriotism, I decided I was no longer interested in American football. So I replaced Super Bowl Sunday with Superb Owl Sunday. And within 4 hours on Superb Owl Sunday morning, I saw this beautiful snowy owl, and then went to another location and spotted this great gray owl looking up at a murder of crows that was flying overhead, and deciding that the best way to disguise himself was to actually become one with the trunk of the tree, just leaned right into the tree, and then didn't keep his eye off the photographer. I then moved to another location where I saw a much more, quite a rare owl in our area, usually found further north, the boreal owl. And here he's being photobombed by a deer in the background and posing for the camera amidst a burst of snow-covered wild carrots. Now, some photographs just make you feel the cold, and this was a really frigid February morning. Now, we also have a resident flock of about 20 wild turkeys at Mud Lake. Now, many of my photographs are at Mud Lake. That's our local conservation area. I know a number of you are Mud Lake fans, but we have a flock of about 20 wild turkeys that hang around all year. And many people think that these birds are ugly, but I actually think that they're quite beautiful. And in fact, when you look close, they're incredibly colorful. It's amazing how these heavy birds can actually take flight. This flock seems to be dreaming the impossible dream until one brave gal decides to show how it's done. Now, the wild turkeys are almost always found on the ground, but one day I arrived and the turkeys, all 20 of them, were very high in the highest trees. And apparently there was a coyote spotted in the area, and so these birds were using their seldom used flying ability to hide from that coyote. This was a great winter for our local deer population as well. They're very common in Trevor's part of the country, but we don't see deer quite as often in the Ottawa area, although at Lac Limy, on the Quebec side of the river, it's actually a very good place to see healthy deer such as this white-tailed doe. And the mother and child that I spotted right on the cross-country ski trail. Now, when you can get this close to a deer, you know that they've probably become used to being fed by humans. Don't feed wild animals. They can fend for themselves, and it's not good for them. It's not good for the environment. Now, I live about 3.5 hours from Algonquin Park, where I used to go canoe camping with my dad. But I had never until this year made the trip. And this year, my friend Vitold, shout out to Vitold, and I made the trip to Algonquin Park, and we weren't disappointed. There were blue jays. There were red-breasted nuthatches. We see mostly white-breasted nuthatches, but there were red-breasted nuthatches and common ravens, this one pausing to have his portrait taken. But the real reason we drove to Algonquin Park was found in these trees. The American marten, sometimes called the pine marten, but that's actually a separate species that's found in Eurasia. But this American marten is an agile, solitary forest dweller, which is known as an indicator species, which means that they are an indicator that the ecosystem is healthy, which it is in Algonquin Park. They need an intact ecosystem to survive, and so they're a good indicator of whether the forest is healthy or not. They're usually ground dwellers, and they use tunnels under the snow or under the ground to find their prey. But they're also very agile tree climbers, and they can use their sharp claws to chase their prey right up into the trees. And you know what? They are so darn cute. It's unbelievable. One of my resolutions for 2026 is actually to visit Algonquin Park much more frequently. Over to you, Trev.
Oh, thanks, Dad. I'm very jealous of your superb owls. They're very difficult to find where I live. Now, there was one early morning in the winter that I was going hiking before the sunrise, and I saw a dark shape moving on the frozen river. So I quickly slid down the riverside, set up my tripod, my camera, and hoped it might come my way. And luckily for me, it did. This is a coyote with the leg of a white-tailed deer in its mouth. And I couldn't believe it as it was walking directly towards me. Then suddenly it paused, put its food down, and did this. Now, if you own a dog, you're probably familiar with this kind of behavior in the snow. But in this case, this coyote's actually cleaning itself because it had just been doing a little bit of a grisly job on a deer carcass. Coyotes are one of the few animals that has actually benefited from human habitation because they used to be largely just in the prairies in the Americas. In fact, they were often called the prairie wolf. But as modern settlement happened and we extirpated wolves, we left a niche open. And this very adaptable canine species was able to take advantage of it and spread. And now they're virtually everywhere on the continent. So after cleaning up, it picked its food back up and kept coming closer and closer. At this point, we met eyes. And just as we did, we shared a moment, and then in fright, it dropped its food and took off. Feeling bad that I might have cost it its meal, I didn't linger for very long. I took off, and hopefully it came back for it. Now, later on, I was able to visit the kill site and do a little amateur forensics. And by reading the white book, as they say, I could see what had happened. It looked like a group of canines, either wolves or coyotes, had chased a deer down onto the ice. Once hitting the ice, it lost its footing. They caught up and were able to dispatch it. So it's a sad day for that deer, but a good day for these wolves, a good day for any scavengers like coyotes, crows, ravens, eagles. And luckily in our area, we have quite a few deer. This is a mule deer. Mule deer are only in the West. So we have two species of deer, mule deer and white-tailed deer. And you'll find them all over the place. But the winter is a tough time for these animals because without the greenery around, they have a lot less to hide behind. They're a lot more exposed. Also, in the deep snow, it can be a lot harder for them to move around. Typically, the predators that prey on these animals are much lighter than them. So they're more likely to get bogged down in the snow, which gives a chance for uh, a predator to catch up and get a meal. But generally speaking, this is a pretty quiet time of year for a wildlife photographer. You're walking around and maybe you hear the occasional sound of a bird that hasn't migrated, like this beautiful varied thrush, or you might hear the wing beats of a passing eagle. This is a bald eagle. Bald eagles don't take their familiar colors until they're about 5 years old. So this is a younger one, and they're more chocolate colored that time of year. But generally speaking, I go on long hikes, and all I'm listening to is the crunch of my own footsteps. But the landscapes are beautiful when covered in snow. That snow also drives certain species to lower altitudes because a lot of animals have to reach the surface, dig for their food, and on the mountaintops, the snow is so deep that's impossible. So this is a great time of year to see animals like these. These are bighorn sheep, a real iconic species of the Rocky Mountains. And here you can really see the difference between a male and a female. The males have those great big curly horns, and the females still have horns, just not quite as impressive. But they're one of my favorite animals to photograph because they're not very skittish. They're very stocky, very muscular, so they don't spook easily. So I find if you move slowly, you can quickly find yourself right in the mix. Although often, at least one of them keeps an eye on you. Typically, the youngsters, especially, and here you can see dad keeping a wary eye. And here you can see how they get their food. So they need to dig through the snow to reach the grass. And often you can see areas where the sheep were yesterday because they leave all these little bald patches in the snow. So it can be a tough time of year. But beyond the elements, beyond the predators, the most dangerous thing for them is the environment that we've presented them with. Their migration routes, their ability to find food, it's all very fractured and dangerous for them. But luckily, in our area, there has been a lot of research and investment in wildlife overpasses, underpasses, fencing, signage like this to try to limit the amount of traffic encounters that these animals have. So this time of year really transforms the landscape. And here you can see ice and snow covering everything. And a lot of the waterways start to freeze up unless it's a spot like this where the water's able to move fast enough that it never entirely freezes. But areas of open water become prime real estate. There was one spot just upriver from my house where you could see day by day the density of these mallards was more and more as this became more and more prime real estate. But luckily for these birds, they can take off at any time. Sadly, I found this bird. This is a young common loon, and this one is trapped. Loons are diving ducks, and their bodies are really maximized for swimming, which is great for catching fish, but not so great for taking off. They need hundreds of meters to run along the surface to take flight. So sadly, this youngster is trapped in its shrinking world. But other animals thrive at this time of year. If you've come to any of our wildlife presentations in the past, you know we're huge fans of river otters. And anytime you encounter a wild river otter, they seem to be living their best life and nothing seems to faze them. I was able to see this one punching holes in the ice every time it surfaced, and it maintained these fishing holes in order to continue to eat all year long. And this one was having no trouble finding its food. Virtually every time it popped up, it had another big fish in its mouth. I assume when the water is this cold, the fish are more sluggish and even easier to catch. But it was a delight to see it eat its food and slip back below the ice for some more. You might wonder how these animals can deal with the cold, and the secret is in its fur. Otters have some of the densest fur in the animal kingdom, and this dense fur is able to trap air bubbles near their skin and create an insulating layer from the cold, so they're able to thrive all year long. And it was absolutely amazing watching it at my local pond catching these fish. Here's one last look at the snowy peaks of the East Kootenays as I pass over the mic to my dad.
Fantastic. It was all great, but the coyote sequence was just unbelievable. That's one of those things where you just wish you were in that spot for that opportunity.
Got lucky.
So spring is such an inspiring season when the world is full of promise and there's new growth everywhere, like this Canada violet, which I saw for the first time this year in Gatineau Park. I didn't even know we had a violet, and boy, if you're going to have a violet, this is a beautiful one to have. So there you go, the Canada violet. And the cuteness meter goes off the scale with babies everywhere, like this Canada Goose mom showing her fuzzy toddler how to crop the grass as close as a putting green, and then, of course, to poop all over it. And this tree swallow bringing bugs home to a wide-mouthed babe. An adult tree swallow can consume as much as 2,000 insects per day, and they feed their nestlings 10 to 20 times an hour for another additional 6,000 insects. So that's 8,000 insects out of the world to feed these birds. They're an incredible natural pest control. And this American redstart with watching over a nest of hungry mouths. The Ottawa River this year experienced an extraordinary range of water levels, and from the spring when the water was actually flooding the entire forest. Normally the shore of the river is down towards the end of these trees that you see in the photograph, and then all the way to the fall when actually you could almost walk all the way out to that island. So we had a real extreme, but the high level water in the spring is great for waterfowl, like this female northern pintail, which is just an elegant duck, and this beautiful wood duck. We are so fortunate to have a lot of wood ducks in our area. Mud Lake sometimes has dozens and dozens and dozens of wood ducks, and they are such a gorgeous bird, so colorful, and they're quite rare in other places. So we get a little bit complacent about it, but we're very lucky to have the wood ducks. And this handsome hooded merganser family, this is in a flooded area. This would normally be ground, and they've found a nice place to reflect. They're on the still water. Of course, in the spring, it's the return of the songbirds as well as the trilliums. These are Ontario trilliums, of course. And the songbirds come back like this beautiful white-throated sparrow. And this yellow-rumped warbler, demonstrating why it has its name. Quite often you can't see the yellow rump, but in this one, it's clearly visible. Now, red-winged blackbirds are very territorial birds, and I mean, some people have been dive bombed by them quite frequently, and they even harass their own reflections. They see them as another bird and want to intimidate them away. This particular bird got squeezed in, contorted his body to squeeze in between a mirror that actually the car owner had folded in to prevent, I suppose, this from happening. And the bird squeezed right in there to harass its own reflection. Now, I've seen birds perching on people's hands before, but usually they are chickadees or nuthatches, sometimes even downy woodpeckers. But on this day, I had never seen a red-winged blackbird do this before, and I want to give a shout out to Phil, who acted as a hand model for this particular photograph. My favorite of the woodpeckers, this is the largest woodpecker in North America, the pileated woodpecker. This is a male. The red flash underneath the jaw of the bird is actually an indicator that it's a male. The female has the red head, but not the red jaw. And this is the model for Woody Woodpecker. For those of you who are closer to my age than to Trevor's age, you'll know who Woody Woodpecker is. And this was his model. And another lifer, a bird that I had never seen before. This is a red-bellied woodpecker. Not much red on the belly, but that's still its name. And it was a thrill to see this beautiful bird. The brown creeper is actually not a woodpecker, but it does find its meals by digging underneath the bark of the tree and finding those grubs and so on. It doesn't actually knock on the tree, but it does dig underneath to get and they cover every single inch of every tree they land on. They're really interesting to watch. And of course, the turkeys are still around. These females are catching the morning sun through their wattles, which is the loose skin that hangs down underneath their throats. And this dude, this is a tom or male woodpecker, is showing off his snood, which is that fleshy protuberance that hangs over his beak. That's a snood that he is very proud of, I'm sure. Now, we're really fortunate to have a wide range of birds in our area that make their living on or near the water, like this black-crowned night heron. This is a really unusual image of a black-crowned night heron. It doesn't really look like that bird, but it's actually has a tailwind that's pushing its feathers forward and creating kind of an unusual expression. This is what they normally look like. This one is sneaking up. They're very stealthy birds, and this one's getting ready to spear a fish on a rainy day. A great egret looking stunning in a flyby. And this is a double-crested cormorant. It's drying its wings, which is a common pose that you see these cormorants take because their feathers are not fully waterproof, which allows them to dive deeper. But the problem is that they do have to dry out their wings afterwards, and that you will often catch them in this pose. But what you won't see very often is the double crest. This is a male showing off its double crest, which is only visible for a couple of months each year during breeding season. Normally, you wonder why it's called a double-crested cormorant. Well, this is why. This common loon came very close to the shore at Lac Philippe in Gatineau Park. Normally, they're either way far out or we actually don't see them that often close to Ottawa. Algonquin Park, you certainly see a lot of them, but this one came right up close to the shore, would give me a chance to get a good portrait. And away from the water, the creatures of the forests and fields are starting to come back. Like this rufous or red color morph of the eastern screech owl. 80% of screech owls are gray and only 20% are red. There is a brown color morph, but it's only found in Florida. But this rufous or red color morph was a great bird to find. Here's a raccoon posing for his portrait. And this guy, unfortunately, another raccoon who seems to be suffering from a genetic disorder or disease of some kind. Animals like this should be avoided, actually, and reported to animal control because this could be canine distemper, which causes infected animals to become disoriented and fearless. And actually, this is normally a nocturnal animal. This raccoon was quite active during the day, which is also a sign that there might be something wrong. Here's an eastern cottontail striking, just caught in mid-turn and striking quite an attractive pose. And a young white-tailed doe, which is actually still, if you look closely at the neck, still showing some of the spots. So it's on its way from being a fawn to being a young doe. But the highlight of our spring season this year was celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. Linda and I went to Tofino on Vancouver Island for a trip of a lifetime. And by the way, I want to give photo credit for some of these images that Linda took. The highlight of the trip was 2 excursions on Clayoquot Sound in a Zodiac. By the way, I should give Kyler Voss the credit for this photo. He was our guide, did a wonderful job. I was in my happy place for a couple of days. It was just absolutely great. And the wildlife sightings were truly awesome, with lots of bald eagles looking majestic in their natural setting. This eagle actually has a fish in its talons, which wasn't completely obvious to me until a crow caused him to take flight, and I could actually see that fish being carried off. But also the eagles took took a perch that was a little bit less expected. This is an eagle that flew in and landed on the mast of the sailboat right next to our Zodiac in the Tofino Marina. So there are eagles everywhere. But our objective on day one was to find bears. And we were so lucky to find a mother and her cub on the shore of a small island, exploring the island together, splitting up and going along the shore looking for crustaceans and other sea creatures that got lodged in the rocks. Now, Mom, I just mentioned the little white flash on the cub's chest. We were wondering if that was really unusual, but it turns out that about 25% of black bears actually have a white flash on their chest. It's called a natal collar or chest flash, and they are common, and they're more common amongst the cubs as well. Mom let Junior kind of explore the island, but she did keep a close watch on her toddler and never really let the cub get too far away. It was a great session. The second day was a whale watching cruise, and we did spot the mist of a gray whale in the distance, but that was about as close as we came. But there were lots of harbor seals basking on the offshore rocks. And this inhospitable place looks quite uncomfortable to us, but it does represent safety for the seals because the predators like orcas can't come into the shallow waters between these rocks, and therefore the seals have a safe place to rest. But the highlight of our time on that second day was actually the sea otters. So we're back to our favorite animal here, Trev. This time, sea otters. We did on the first day spot a couple of sea otters kind of floating out on their own, but the real delight of our final day was finding our raft of several hundred sea otters. Sometimes these rafts can reach as many as 1,000 animals, and they provide the sea otter with safety, with warmth, with social bonding. The otters even hold pause to avoid drifting away like this little guy, and they wrap themselves in kelp to make sure that they don't drift apart. Now, as Trevor said, being an otter is just like the best life you can imagine. Looks like a fantastic way to live your life, and in fact, you can just lie back and chill out on your waterbed. Trevor.
Thanks, Dad. That was beautiful. So winter is a star season in a ski town, but it is a long and cold season. So I'm very glad when the signs of spring start to return to our little valley. One of the first flowers to pop up is this one. This is a Rocky Mountain Trillium. And this is the time of year that new life comes into being. So you see lots of mother animals going around with their young, like this mallard with her ducklings. But it wasn't just the wildlife last spring that was bringing new life into the world. This was also the time that my wife Jennifer and I welcomed our little daughter Hannah into the world. Here you can see her tiny little hand. And it was absolutely amazing to have this new little goo ball in my life. But I also knew that it was going to affect the amount of photography I was able to do. But luckily, where I live, sometimes the animals come to you. This is her when she's just 10 days old in her room, and a deer came by to nibble on our garden. But what I really found this year was it was a great time to lean into your local surroundings. So just about every day, I went for a walk with Hannah out to my local park. And usually I would go for much more far-flung adventures. But what I found was amazing was going to the same place every day through many seasons. I was astonished by the variety of wildlife I was able to find. And I hope that can inspire you to spend time in your green spaces and really walk slowly, look and listen, because I guarantee you will be amazed by what you're able to find if you look close enough. So in the spring, after the long, quiet winter, the sounds start to return. You start hearing the pecking of a big pileated woodpecker like this one. As my dad mentioned, these are the biggest woodpeckers in the Americas. And when you're walking around and you see a tree with a big oval shaped hole in it, that's the work of a pileated woodpecker. They form really dedicated pairs, and here you can see the couple is foraging together. We got the male in the background and the female in the foreground. But my favorite thing is the return of the songbirds because it's so quiet through the winter, and then you start hearing chirping from birds like this ruby-crowned kinglet, these tiny little birds that are coming back from migration, or the yellow-rumped warbler, here not showing off its namesake. Or you might find birds like this white-crowned sparrow. What I find amazing is these small, little, delicate chirping birds have migrated maybe as far as Mexico and came all the way back to feast on the food in the spring. This is a female red-winged blackbird, looking very different from her male counterpart. And this is a Nashville warbler. This is one of the ones that spent its entire winter down in Mexico catching some rays and flew all the way back to feast. Here's a spotted towhee, which didn't travel quite as far, but I managed to capture it taking flight. And it's not just on all the shrubs and in the trees that you're finding all these migratory birds coming back. If you look to the water, you'll also find them. This unusual looking duck is one of my favorites. This is called a ruddy duck, and I love its powder blue bill. It's very unique. And these are diving ducks, so I was able to watch it pop in and out of the water. And what I've found with wildlife photography is you really need to pounce when the animals show up. That ruddy duck was just in transition on its migration further north, so it was only around for a few days. So I was delighted to get those pics. Now, some animals that didn't migrate are just now able to be seen. This is all the work of a beaver. In the foreground, there's a beaver dam. In the background, you got a beaver lodge. The lodge is where they live and has an underwater entrance. And throughout the whole winter, they don't hibernate, but they live off stored food that they've buried into the mud just outside the opening to their house. So they're able to swim under the ice, grab some food, go home, and nibble it in their nice warm house. But now they're out in the open. Now, just like the river otter I told you about before, the secret to these guys staying warm is their nice, thick fur. And this kind of fur takes maintenance. So I was able to catch this youngster and its mom helping to groom each other on the shore. Beavers eat a lot of different things, but one of the main things they feed on is the layer of soft material that's between the bark and the wood on a tree. So you can see they strip down whole branches like that bare one in the background as they feast. Now, going to that local pond every day with Hannah, the thing that I was struck by was how rich the fish life was in this little pond. This is a man-made pond for flood mitigation for the city of Fernie, but wildlife has completely taken it over. And you can tell that there's lots of fish in there because there's lots of fish-eating animals. Like these diving ducks, this is a hooded merganser. Or you start to see bigger birds like these great blue herons that snatch like a cobra little fish in the shallows. But if we're talking about fishing birds, we have to talk about the king. This is a kingfisher, very aptly named, small birds that are total experts at snatching fish out of the water. Here you can see it with its catch. If you're familiar with the kookaburra, that's in the same family of birds, but there's kingfishers all over the world. We only have one species. And here in this profile, you can see the secret to its success. These birds are designed like a dart. That with their great big heads, they go flying right into the water and snatch the fish. Now, here's a little fact for all you bird nerds out there, and I know you're there. This is a belted kingfisher, which is the only kingfisher species that we have. And unlike most birds, the female rather than the male, is the more colorful and larger bird. So tell your friends at your next cocktail party. Now, looking at fishing birds, here is the master. This is an osprey. An osprey is a hawk, sometimes called a fish hawk. They're a little smaller than eagles, and you'll often see them perched up high near the water. And then when they see their prey, they take flight. These are incredible birds to watch, incredible birds at catching fish. And here you can see one of the secrets to its success if you look towards its talons. Each talon has 4 toes on it. Each toe has a huge hooked claw. So once they get a grasp of a slippery fish, they're not going to let go. And here you can see it flying into the water. At the last possible second, it throws those talons forward, and there's a big splash. And then the bird flies up out of the water with a wiggling fish in its talons. But it's not just the birds that are hunting for fish in this little pond of mine. There's my favorite, the river otter. River otters, they don't have a den per se. They move through a large hunting territory, and they sort of have a bunch of crash pads around. So they have places they frequent, but they're not there all the time. In the case of this pond, this wiggly little water weasel was living in a abandoned beaver den, which is a very common home for a river otter. And just like in the wintertime, this one was having tremendous success, more often than not coming up with a fish sticking out of its mouth. And more often than not, that's how you see a river otter, with a big fat fish stogie hanging out of its mouth. Here you can see it in the springtime rain, but that's the way an otter likes it, nice and wet. And here you can see some of the mist clinging to the mountains in what is a very wet time of year. But that's it for spring. Let's hand it back over to Dad.
Great, Trev. And I just love that Hannah Joan made the very first Wild Places, Wild Faces show. I think she's about 10 days old in that photo. So welcome, Hannah. Summer is my favorite season, actually, when everything has reached its full potential, like this fly agaric mushroom. This is actually highly poisonous, very poisonous. It's part of the Amanita family. But this was not a great year for mushrooms. Those of you who have seen previous shows, I love photographing fungi, and I often have a lot of fungi to show you. But actually, this year was so dry that there were very few mushrooms around. So the wet weather actually really helps in the fungi world. So the hot days of summer are the time when start with this great blue heron trying to keep cool, and they use a process that's called gular fluttering, which is like avian panting, like a dog would do, promoting heat loss through evaporation from its mouth and its throat tissues. And they can't sweat, so this is the only way that they can dissipate the heat. And sometimes they get cooled down by striking this flasher pose. And it also is a way of drying wings, but it looks rather obscene when they actually decide that they're going to stand there like this. And just as this guy was striking the pose, this great egret decided to fly in and to land on exactly the same log, which actually completely spoiled the moment for this great blue heron. I love the quality of the light in the summer because it brings out the best in all of us. Like this mallard mom with her little brood just catching the light perfectly. And this belted kingfisher, we have them on our end of the country as well, just scanning the pond for a scaly lunch. And this osprey sharing its breakfast with the flies. I mean, I looked at this osprey. We have big fish in Mud Lake, by the way. This came out of Mud Lake. We have some big northern pike in a very small body of water. But I looked up and I noticed the size of these flies or bees or whatever they are that are actually trying to muscle in on the osprey's lunch were quite impressive. And even this molting northern cardinal is looking good in the summer light. These are beautiful birds for most of the year, but they do lose their feathers once a year. Sometimes it's only a few feathers. This dude lost all the feathers on his head and has ended up looking rather like yours truly, which is not that flattering. But anyway, he's going to grow his feathers back, which I'm not, and that'll be great. Lots of eastern cottontails, quite alert watching me, but they this was a good year for the cottontails. And the white-tailed deer, this little herd of 3 does and 2 fawns, were both alert and calm enough for one of the little fawns to supplement her grassy diet with a little help from her mom. Another reason I love summer so much is that we usually get to travel somewhere really interesting. And in another patriotic statement, we decided to stop visiting the coast of Maine after nearly 65 summers. We discovered Showback Farm in Kingsburg, Nova Scotia, and we'll never look back. This is an absolutely fabulous part of the country near Lunenburg. We were greeted by a welcoming party of Nova Scotians. This was a beautiful, healthy male white-tailed deer with the velvet still on its small antlers, striking a rather regal pose. Our beach was called Hurdles Beach. Now, this is a panoramic shot, so the beach is actually wrapping around me. It's behind me as well as on either side. So it's a straight beach, but the panoramic causes it to look like this. The boulders are basically palm-sized boulders that formed a berm along the sand, and this is a perfect habitat for one animal, the wolf spider. So these spiders had made their homes in the boulders, and if you look closely on the back of this spider, those are about 30 little tiny baby spiders riding on mom's back. This is the only spider, the only arachnid that actually carries their babies on the back, but it's quite an amazing sight to see. Now, as you walk along the beach, we have an inland sea with lots of water birds on the right and waterfowl on the right, and then the ocean beach with lots of cavorting harbor porpoises that would follow us as we walked along the beach. This is the path down to the beach from our cottage, and it was absolutely a fantastic place for watching wildlife like this ruby-throated hummingbird. This is a female, so the ruby throat is not showing. But if you look, this is a scarlet bee balm plant, which is probably the hummingbird's favorite plant, just perfect for that long proboscis to go down and suck out the nectar. But if you watch one of these plants for long enough, a buzzing bird will show up pretty soon. And so we said farewell to Nova Scotia. You could make a song about that. And we moved on from Nova Scotia to Prince Edward Island and visited friends there. This is the Greenwich National Park on the north shore of PEI. And we were able to spot a great blue heron and a flyby. We watched a couple of teenage ospreys watching mom pull into the driveway. And we spotted this herring gull in the Charlottetown Harbor, actually, with a plump starfish doing what herring gulls do with plump starfish, swallowing it whole without even pausing to chew. Now, another summer highlight for us this year was to actually go out and visit Hannah. And Trev and Jennifer as well. But we passed through Crow's Nest Pass. This is on the way from Calgary to Fernie, through Frank Slide, which is where a mountain basically covered a small village, a small town, back at the turn of the last century. But we were greeted by this fog bank, almost looking like Niagara Falls coming over the pass as we came into the area. It's so wonderful that we have such a great reason to visit the Rockies a couple of times every year and see these beautiful mountains. But this year, I got a peek behind the scenes. You know that Trevor plants these trail cams out all over the place, and he actually invited his old dad to go with him to see how it's done. And I got to watch him. I got to watch the master at work as he mounted the trail cam. And as we were walking away from this setup, I thought, I wonder how long it will take for a moose to be captured on the camera. And we only had to wait a few minutes because as we walked out, we were confronted by this female moose. Doesn't look very big in this picture, but boy, it looked big when we saw it, standing right in the trail that we were walking along. And Trevor and I stepped off the trail to give her some space so that she could pass by. We let her do that, and then we walked back to the parking lot, and Trevor pointed to the sign that said, "Caution, aggressive moose in the area," which I hadn't seen. I was just as happy not to see it until after we'd actually spent some time with the moose. As we left Fernie on our way north, we went up to Banff on the way out, and we went through Radium Hot Springs, which is an epicenter for these mountain sheep, the Rocky Mountain sheep that Trevor has talked to us about. In fact, they even have vehicles that escort these sheep across the highway to make sure that they're safe. But as Trevor mentioned, they've actually built these bridges that opened this summer. The construction on this began in 2024. It opened in June 2025. We took this photograph right at the end of May. So it's now being used by sheep to cross the highway and without the need for an escort, which is, in my opinion, a great investment. You know, the Rocky Mountains are such an amazing part of our natural heritage, and I'm just delighted that we get an opportunity to visit it so often. Over to you, Trev.
Thanks, Dad. So you just saw the behind the scenes. So let's see in front of the scenes. Let's see what that camera captured. Oh, I love using these trail cameras. It's really fun to see what animals get up to when we're not there. And it's very handy when you're the dad of a brand new baby and you don't have as much time as you used to take pictures of animals. Now, this spot is really unique because there is water that seeps out of the ground that's rich in all kinds of minerals that ungulates need. Ungulates are hooved animals, so all the members of the deer species, like these white tails here with a couple tiny little fawns. One of the things I think is incredible about all the members of the deer species is these antlers are grown annually from scratch, bigger and better than ever every year. And you can see them in progress there. But like they say, there's always a bigger fish. Well, there's always a bigger deer. So these are elk. Just about everything in the area I live is named after this big species of the deer family. Here, looking very svelte in their summer dress. Usually they have a big fuzzy turtleneck. And just like those deer before, you can see their babies have spots. These spots are to mimic the dappled sunlight that you get in the forest and helps these youngsters blend in while they're so vulnerable. Now, this guy is not very vulnerable. This is the king of the deer species. This is, of course, a moose. This is a big bull moose, and I was delighted to find that I caught it in its morning calisthenics. And you can see that the antlers aren't just for show. They're very useful for scratching an itch in a private place. But once again, to remind you, these antlers are grown every year, which is absolutely amazing. These ones aren't at their full size, but they're about as wide as my arms can go. These are also bulls, but they're very early in their antler development and looking a little nervous because you might be the king of the deer, but you're still prey when there's predators about. This is a grizzly bear, of course, but we do have two kinds of bears. And here is a black bear with that white flash. The mother is checking things out ahead of her youngster as she approaches. So it can be, you can villainize predators all you want, but they got babies too, so they got to eat. And they're not the only handsome animals in the area. Look at these two handsome guys. They have no idea they're about to walk right into a moose. But let's go from the big to the small. This time of year is when the valley goes flower crazy, and all the pollinators are busy, busy, busy. Like this Calliope hummingbird. Calliope hummingbird is the second smallest bird on Earth and the smallest migrating bird on Earth. These birds weigh less than 2 grams. They're smaller than my thumb, and they fly all the way to Mexico and back, which absolutely blows my mind. But it's not just birds doing the pollinating. There's, of course, the insects. We've got moths fluttering about. We also have butterflies fluttering about. But with all this increased insect activity, that means there's a lot of insectivores about, like this gorgeous and aptly named violet green swallow. These birds fly around like a jet fighter, snatching insects out of midair. One day I caught these two insectivores in action. This is in a more industrial area of Fernie, just behind the workshop that I work at. And I was so delighted to find these birds because it is a bit of a rare sighting in these parts. This is an American kestrel. American kestrels are the smallest raptors in the Americas. They're about the size of a blue jay, for reference, and they eat lots of small stuff. So here you can see it just caught a nice juicy grasshopper in midair. And it was amazing to see these birds flitter around. But I absolutely love the colors and plumage of these tiny little terrors. And just like I said before, with wildlife photography, you really have to pounce because these birds only hung around for a couple evenings. And I was so glad that I was able to get these shots, get them flittering about. And they don't just eat bugs. They that swallow has to watch out too, because these birds will catch smaller birds in midair as well. Now, the bigger birds, like this one, are busy with their nests. This is an osprey, and it has built a nest on a purpose-built platform. Osprey nests can be very large and very heavy, and they'll build them on anything that's tall near good fishing grounds, and that includes power lines. So to avoid them building these big flammable structures on power lines, people will build these purpose-built platforms, and you'll see them all over the place in my part of BC. Osprey are very committed pairs. When one of them is taking care of the eggs or the young babies, it is dependent on fish deliveries from its mate. So it was great to find a spot to observe this nest because I could just set up with a tripod and wait for the fish deliveries while with my other hand I'm jiggling the stroller, desperately trying to get my baby to have her nap. But here they are. I was very glad that these birds decide to set up in such a scenic spot. But typically, birds like to hide their nests more. Here is a bald eagle in a more thickly foliaged area. And talking to some locals, this was actually a great blue heron nest that the eagles took over. Here's a little view of the Elk Valley here. One day I was really lucky to discover that there was a moose across the street. This one just popped up out of the woods and went to our local pond where it fed on some aquatic plants. Aquatic plants are really important to a moose's diet. It has lots of nitrogen that they can't get from terrestrial plants. So that's why you see them in swamps and marshes and all that kind of stuff. And this time of year, in the late spring or early summer, they can look a little haggard. This isn't the handsome moose season. Here you can see its shoulders are almost bare. And the reason for this is kind of gross. Throughout the winter, moose have big problems with ticks. They're winter ticks that are specifically adapted to cling onto moose, and a moose can have tens of thousands of ticks on it. So to get rid of them, they'll rub really hard on trees to scrape them off. But in doing so, they scrape off their own fur as well. So this fur will eventually grow back, and this will be a more handsome moose. But from a distance, still looks pretty good. Here is a beaver, and this time of year, for a beaver, the world is your salad. they're not just eating bark, they can eat all kinds of stuff. So you'll see them eating all kinds of leaves and green vegetation and plants and dandelions and all that kind of stuff. But this shot gives you a good look at their very unique teeth. Here's another angle. Their teeth are orange, and they're orange for good reason. Their tooth enamel has a lot of iron in it, which makes them really durable and helps them keep an edge because the backside of their tooth, the backside of their teeth doesn't have this hard enamel, so it wears quicker than the front does, which means it always has a nice sharp chisel shaped tooth, which is good for cutting down trees. Some of my favorite animals are aquatic mammals because like beavers or otters, they're very ungainly and kind of clumsy when you see them on land. But as soon as they hit water, it's like they transform into this graceful, speedy, amazing creature. And you can see what they really evolved for. Beavers are surprisingly graceful when you see them in the water. The summertime unlocks a big part of the habitat in our area. Up in the high alpine, this area remains really covered in snow until really late in the summer, where you can hike up and explore this area, explore this habitat, and if you're lucky, come face to face with one of my favorite creatures, the pika. Also pronounced pika. These are impossibly cute little relatives of rabbits that live up high in the scree, in the eroded, crumbling boulders up high in the mountains. And this time of year, they are busy because all summer long, they're collecting all kinds of flowers, all kinds of leaves, plants. In this case, impossibly cute, it's carrying a fresh wild strawberry with it as it runs back to its hideout. These hideouts are called haystacks, where it hides all this food and builds it up. And they're always constantly working on their haystacks. They're stirring them up so that they won't rot and instead they'll dry in the sun. So they have this big haystack, and once this whole area is buried in snow for the majority of the year, these animals don't hibernate. They feed off of their gotten gains. But it's amazing when you get up there looking for pikas, and at first all you're doing is hearing them. You can hear their little alarm squeaks. They sound like a dog's squeaky toy, but they're very hard to see, especially when they're far away. You can see, if you can, how good the camouflage is on these little creatures. They just look like little boulders in a sea of boulders. Here's one last look at the kingdom of the pika as I send it back over to Ottawa with Dad.
Oh, Trev, I mean, what would a Wild Places, Wild Faces presentation be without pikas? I mean,
People
really,
would riot.
I know it's just it's a highlight, no question. Well, fall is normally a wonderful time for wildlife photography in Ottawa-Gatineau, as the incredible colors add the perfect backdrop for compelling images. But for me, this fall was quite different. I had a medical procedure that resulted in some complications, which restricted my mobility in the month of October, which is usually the prime month for autumn photography. And I was feeling pretty down about this until I gave myself the challenge of finding wildlife within 1 kilometer of my front door. And indeed, I found this hairy woodpecker with a great bouquet of light behind it, and this really photogenic dark-eyed junco within about 200 meters of my front door. So back to Trev's point about, having a new baby and just going to the local park, within a few hundred meters of your front door, there's bound to be lots of wildlife to see and appreciate. And it was also a time when I could introduce my grandsons to wildlife photography. That's Connor on the left and Charlie on the right. And we went out to Mud Lake and did some photography. Connor was a pro right out of the gate. and we had just a blast. So stay tuned to Wild Places, Wild Faces in future years, because you'll have another generation of wildlife photographers, including Hannah as well. She'll be with us as well. And this next photograph, this is not taken by me. This is taken by 8-year-old Connor Vaughn. Way to go, Connor. A great photo of a resting Canada goose. Now, the waterfowl make the most of the water. This is going to be ice pretty soon, so it's a good time for the waterfowl to charge up before they head south, most of them. Like this stunning wood duck on a surface of gold, this tuxedo-clad hooded merganser, and his date. And I had some unusual sightings. This is called a Mankey mallard, which is a hybrid between a wild mallard and a domestic duck, not something you see every day. And this leucistic Canada goose. Many species can be leucistic. It is a genetic disorder which results in a lack of pigmentation going to the end of the feathers or the end of the fur. Some animals can be almost entirely white, not albino, so they don't have pink eyes, but they can either go entirely white or they can be mottled like this Canada goose. I have seen several different species that are leucistic in nature. Now, as the plants like this milkweed pod begin to die and become dormant as winter approaches, it's an opportunity to appreciate the last of the songbirds. By the way, these are really important plants because it's the only food that monarch butterflies feed on. So the songbirds are like this white-throated sparrow, which is actually, if you look closely, you can see its little tiny tongue tasting that delicious seed. And this little gem, it's an American goldfinch, which actually do stay around through most of the year here, but it's just a beautiful little bird. And of course, one more season with the turkeys, these young Turks patrolling Mud Lake and making sure the humans know their place. Well, this fall started pretty slowly for me, but I must admit it finished very strong in late November and December. We had a really early winter this year. There was snow on the ground by November the 10th. We're already getting a little tired of it. But the arrival of colder temperatures didn't affect some really, truly great wildlife encounters. Like this bald eagle that I found on the shore of the Rideau River. And he decided that he would take flight when I had my camera ready for a change, which was great. Or this tiny muskrat scratching his head in perplexity. Now I see quite a few muskrats, like this one having an oyster feast on the ice on the Ottawa River, but I don't see beavers very often. So I was really delighted to see this beaver on the shore of a little pond, and he would go up, he or she, I'm not sure, but would go up the shore, dig out some roots, carry them back to the water, and chew away. In fact, most of the time, the beaver actually was swimming while it was eating, and it was oblivious to me. I was right on the shore, and it would just swim up and down past me, and even looking like it was swimming right through an abstract painting in this image. And now the cold of winter was a good time to see the winter critters and to see them with a very striking backdrop. By the way, I went for a hike here. I really wished I'd brought my snowshoes with me because I was walking through knee-deep snow for about 5 kilometers. It was quite a slog, but it led me to a lot of great sights. This is a black-capped chickadee, probably our most common bird sighting in the winter. They're all over the place, but in a striking setting like this, they look really stunning. Or this beautiful male cardinal, again, here all year, but always look just that much better with a snowy backdrop. And this common buckthorn bush was full of Bohemian waxwings, but this fellow was truly outstanding on the end of a little twig in the middle of a of a snowstorm. And as December moved along, it just kept getting better and better as it came to a close. I had a great session with this 9 point white-tailed deer buck. It would be called a 5x4 in Western Canada, but a 9 point buck here. I see does reasonably often, but I seldom see a buck, especially one a big, healthy buck like this one. And I was, I don't know, about 5 meters away at most, and he was. We kept our distance, but he was watching me, and I was watching him. It was a very intimate moment. And then 2 days before Christmas, I had this wonderful gift of about half an hour with this barred owl that was actually perched right at eye level, uh, doing a little bit of preening with those talons, uh, just contemplating the winter conditions, striking just a really thoughtful pose. It was really, really a great moment. How much better can it be? But I'll finish my section of the presentation with my favorite wildlife encounter of the year. I was walking through the woods and I spotted this little brown ball that was on a tiny tree. Now, the tree on the left of this brown ball is actually not the tree he's perched on. He's perched on that tiny spindly pine behind it. It is a baby porcupine, no bigger than a softball, tiny little porcupine. And as I made my way around that little tiny tree, he crawled further up the limb, but not before I was able to get to kind of shatter the cuteness meter with an incredible photograph of this baby porcupine with a head-on look. You can see those orange teeth that Trevor described before. So with that, I'll turn it over to Trevor for the final season.
Thanks so much. So this is the final chapter, everybody, and just a reminder that we are concluding with a Q&A. So if you have any burning questions, make sure you put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer whatever you've got. So the fall is my favorite season. I think it's the most beautiful time of year. And it just adds so much layers to the landscape, especially in the mountains, because the seasons sort of depend on what altitude you're at. The snow happens higher up earlier, so you end up with this cool multi-layered landscape that I think makes the mountains look taller. And the fall contains a couple of my favorite annual events. When you really start to pay attention to nature and spend whole years doing this, you start to look forward to a bunch of micro seasons within each season because there's some things that happen every year. And this thing is known by all the fish eating species around here, like these common mergansers taking off. Just like the loons I was telling you about, these birds are evolved to maximize their potential for swimming, not so much flying. So it takes a lot of effort for them to get up and off the water. But other fish eaters are anxiously awaiting this annual event as well, like my favorite, the river otter here. You can see it here quivering with anticipation. And this happens in all the creeks and the rivers around us. This is the Lower Elk River, which has a series of choke points. And if you position yourself on them, you'll see what this annual event is all about. And it happens under the surface. It is the salmon run. These are kokanee salmon. Kokanee salmon are a freshwater version of sockeye salmon. They're the same species, but these ones never touch the ocean. They spend most of their time living in a big lake near us called Lake Koocanusa, and usually they're silver fish. But this time of year, they turn bright orangey red and they fight their way up the current back to where they were born to spawn. And this is a one-way trip. Once they lay their eggs and do their thing, they're not coming back. But it's a very treacherous thing for them because they're a bright orange fish in very shallow water. So they're easy pickings for all the predators around. But that's not the only annual event of the fall. There's also what's called the rut. The rut is experienced by all the ungulate species, sheep, deer, moose. This is where the males show who's boss and they face off. This is what they've been growing those antlers for all year long. And they do these fights, and the winner is established as the one who's best to have some babies. But this is also a time of year where it's more slim pickings for deer. All summer long, it seems like they can eat just about anything. But as the fall goes on, they have to resort to some of the more bitter tasting plants like this mountain ash here. When you're really into wildlife photography and your friends know it, you start to get a lot of unsolicited tips, which is one of my favorite things. My buddy Pete sent me a text message one day to tell me there's some roadkill outside of town and some eagles are eating it. And I thought, hooray! And I grabbed my camera and I got in the car and I zoomed out. And I'm just so glad I have friends that know my ghoulish appetites. But it was great to see these birds swooping around as they fought for position on this unfortunate elk that got struck by a car. Here's a bald eagle soaring in front of the mountains. This is another one of those young bald eagles that hasn't quite taken on its coloring. But another species that was feeding on this poor elk was the magpie. This is the black-billed magpie, which I grew up in Ontario and my wife grew up in Calgary. These birds are very common for anybody who grew up in the West, but to someone who grew up in the East, I am totally charmed by these parrots. They look like a crow wearing a tuxedo, and they're very clever birds, but I'm just blown away by their colors, and they're always very special when you find them. So as the fall goes on, the snow starts to come in and you start to get this mix of colors. And our fall comes in two stages. So first, we have our broad-leafed deciduous trees, like birch trees that turn yellow and drop their leaves. And here you can see one of our mule deer is gaining its handsome winter coat as things start to get a little bit colder. But this is the second stage. So once all the broadleaf trees have lost their leaves, we have a special tree that changes color, and this is the larch, also known as a tamarack tree. And these are trees with needles, so they're conifers, but they're needles that change color and fall in the fall, which is deciduous. So they're actually a deciduous conifer, which is a very ancient tree. Here you can see it's overlapping with the snow. Some of the needles are changing color, but this is a wonderful time for photographers who often refer to this as larch madness, as the larches reach their peak colors and you get these beautiful stripes of golden yellow in the forest. But there's an area that's just outside of town. It's about a half-hour drive from where I live. And what's interesting in the mountains is all the valleys have little microclimates, and it's much drier in this area we refer to as the South Country than where I'm living in the Elk Valley. So I went down to the South Country and I set up a trail camera after a particular species, a very elusive species that I had a lot of trouble getting. But I'm delighted to tell you this year I've got it and I've saved the best for last. Here you can see one of the creatures, but this is not what I was after specifically. Here you can see a couple of black bears looking for food, and mom is curious. Black bears are really intelligent animals. It seems like the more varied your diet is, the more intelligent the animal is because they have more problems they have to solve in order to take advantage of all different kinds of food sources. So bears are very curious, very clever, and you can see here Mama Bear is checking out the camera. But this camera, I left it out all year long, and you can see the bear gave me a little jaunty angle. It was my cinematographer on the shot. I got lots of deer, but I wasn't after deer. I was after the animal that hunts deer. This is a cougar, also known as a puma or a mountain lion. There are many names for this cat because it's the widest ranging terrestrial predator on the planet. You can find them all the way from Alaska to Patagonia at the tip of South America, and they're very successful hunters. Here you can see it quietly moving through the bush. They're ambush hunters, so not typically chase down predators. They'll wait in a spot and pounce onto the back of these unsuspecting deer. And they need a lot of deer in order to thrive because an adult cougar will have to eat the equivalent of one deer a week. That means it takes 50 deer a year to sustain one of these cats. So you need a very intact, thriving environment for them. And lucky for them, in this area, they've got it. They're super athletic cats. They've got the highest standing jump out of any species in the world. They can jump 16 feet straight up. So these deer have a reason to be concerned. But the cats aren't the top predator around here. You've got animals like these grizzly bear that can easily chase them off of a kill. So when a cougar makes a kill, it'll eat the most nutritious parts quickly and then try to hide the animal because these grizzly bears can push them off and steal the kill, which they have to because they got babies too. See the babies slinking away. Here's one last look at the valley in peak Larch Madness, and this is where I conclude my part of the presentation. So thank you so much for joining us, and we really hope this inspires you to get outside.
Wow, what a fantastic presentation. Huge thank you, Scott and Trevor. I can see from all the emojis that everyone is so engaged. Your spectacular photos and videos and your storytelling knowledge really has inspired us this evening. And of course, thanks to all of you for being here, but don't go away. We're going to open up the floor for some questions and answers. I'm going to read each question, and Scott and Trevor will work together to provide the response. If you have any technical questions about photography, please feel free to contact Scott and Trevor directly, but we're not going to answer some technical questions about photography tonight, or we'd be here all night. So I am going to read some of the questions. Okay. Are you ready, Scott and Trevor?
Ready? Yes. Yeah, please.
Okay. So question from Brian. At what altitude do you find the pikas, Trev?
Oh, I wouldn't know number wise. I think it's more about being in the scree. So that being in that crumbling, rocky environment. Yeah, I don't know the answer number wise, but if you're up high in the Alpine in that broken scree-like environment with some greenery around the edges, then that's ideal habitat for a pika.
Okay.
If you want to see a pika in a way that's not as strenuous as what Trev goes through, if you're ever in Banff and you take the Sulphur Mountain gondola, it takes you up high enough to see pika.
Oh, okay.
I have photographed a couple of pika. They're not as good as Trev's photos, but I have photographed pikas at the top of the Sulphur Mountain gondola. So if you're ever out there, that's an easy way to get to pika country.
Okay. Thank you. Great tip. Here's from Why Told. He asks, oh, and I think you mentioned this, are there any predators that moose need to be wary of?
Yeah, it's my understanding that it's moose calves that are preyed upon the most. It's a big food source for bears. But adult moose, once they get slow, typically wild animals don't die of old age. So once they reach a slow enough pace, then animals can catch up to them. And we do have packs of wolves near us, and wolves, I think, would be the main predator for an adult moose.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for this. Okay. Lori asks, can you explain again why that deer is called a 9-point in Eastern Canada? I didn't see nine points on the antlers.
Yeah. So Google is your friend. This is how I learn a lot of these things, but I was wondering how this happens. So it's hunters, not hunters with cameras, but hunters with guns, who actually have come up with the numbering system, and it's designed to make sure that you don't hunt uh, deer that are too young. So it's a conservation strategy by hunters or by the people that regulate hunting. And so they count the points to decide whether the buck is big enough to shoot, I guess. For me, I shoot them no matter how big they are, but I shoot them with my camera. So it happens that in the West they count a little bit differently, but it's the same idea. The point on the end of the antlers that ends in a point, that has to be at least 1 inch long. And you count each point on both sides. In the East and the West, you count each side separately. The question is, they also have a brow point, a little horn that's above the eyebrows. In the East, those are counted. In the West, they're not counted, I believe. But anyway, I'm not an expert on that, but that's how the 9 point system goes. By the way, I posted that. I had more response from hunters than I've ever got from any post before. It got into a big argument, deciding whether in fact how many points it had. So it's controversial amongst the people who even know how it works, and it's a lot more complicated than I think it probably needs to be.
And I'm not a hunting expert, but typically where I'm living, the only deer or elk that are in season that are legal to harvest will have 5 or 6 points on their antlers, which really gives you a respect for how difficult it is, because it's very rare to find an animal with that many points, and to get close to it is very, very difficult.
Okay. Well, thank you for this. Knowledge we didn't know that we needed to know. Isn't that amazing? Okay, here's from Charles. Why does my local beaver pile up 50 centimeters of Eurasian milfoil on a rock in the lake in the fall?
Holy smoke!
I mean, one reminder to everybody is we're not biologists. we're just very enthusiastic amateurs. So that
my guess would, I mean, Eurasian milfoil is probably some kind of it's a plant, obviously. My guess it would be having to do with storing food would probably be the guess, but I've actually never seen evidence of that. I mean, usually you see intertwined sticks and stuff building the dam, and they use mud and things like that, but it would likely have to do with storing food, or perhaps reinforcing some of the buildings they make, but it's hard to know.
Yeah.
Okay, noted. I mean, you could have fooled us. You're quite knowledgeable as amateurs. Okay, from Larry. Over the years, have you noticed a general decline in population of birds and insects?
Very, very good question. I mean, my answer would be I'm on the trail probably because I'm retired, 3 or 4 days a week. So I'm out a lot. I cover a lot of territory in this area. And in that little bit of observation, I see some seasonal fluctuation, but you can't really tell that, the number of species is going up or down, because you see what you see where you happen to be, right?
Yeah.
However, what I do know, because I participate very enthusiastically as a citizen scientist with the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is the group that does Merlin, the bird identification app, and does eBird, the citizen science tracking of bird populations. I know, because I participate in that the overall bird population has declined in absolutely dramatically. There are 3 billion birds less in the world today than there were in 1970. So, within my lifetime, there's been a massive collapse of bird species. What's really interesting is that because of this citizen science, we actually know where the bird populations and which species are declining in which areas. Because the interesting thing is, although overall, all the bird species have been in decline, rapid decline. There are pockets where populations are increasing, and there's certainly some conservation stories that have been absolutely wildly successful. The bald eagle would be probably one of the best examples where the recovery has been pretty dramatic. But we now know where it's going up and down. So the scientists can actually go into the areas where bird populations are prospering, and they can figure out why. I mean, most of the decline is from human intervention, primarily through climate change, but also through habitat loss and through things that you might not think of, like bird collisions with buildings. And we're starting to see responses to that. Many buildings are putting up glass that actually the birds can see. So but we're learning more through this active engagement. Millions and millions of bird watchers around the world are involved in eBird. It's quite impressive, and it's helping us understand what's going on. But the declines have been quite alarming, and they do continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think I've been seriously doing wildlife photography for about 6 years now, uh, which is not enough time to really uh, uh, gauge increases or decreases. But what I like doing is picking the brain of older folks that I find out in the bush, which is typically hunters who have spent decades really paying attention. And when I talk to those guys, it at least anecdotally, it seems like virtually every species is more scarce than it used to be.
Okay, thank you for that. This is a quick question from Deb. Those pictures in Nova Scotia were beautiful. What was the name of the farm that you stayed at?
It's a place called Showback Farm. It's in Kingsburg, Nova Scotia, which is about 20 kilometers from Lunenburg. And it is a farm that the buildings have been designed by, if you're from the East Coast, you might know Brian McKay Lyons is the architect, and just a beautiful spot. Great part of the country.
Thank you. Here's one. In terms of capturing great photos, would you say it's better to be on the move and cover more ground, or stay in one spot and wait for something to appear? And this is from Angie.
Great question, Angie. Go ahead, Trev.
Well, it's interesting. I think that my dad and I have a similar temperament, which doesn't allow us to sit still for hours and hours at a time. We're more like hike around and see what's around. But certainly, I've been spending a lot more time getting inspired by professional wildlife photographers and different, coffee table books and that kind of thing. And it seems like if you've really got the time and the focus and the energy, and you have a specific goal in mind, then creating the best environment for you to capture that, and sitting still and waiting for the right moment is the way to do it. But you can do either, I think.
Yeah. It's a really great question, and it's a debate. I've talked to a lot of people about it. As Trev said, I like to hike, but my goal for the last period of time since I started this was to actually cover a lot of the trail system, and I'm happy to say that there aren't very many trails in the Ottawa-Gatineau area that I haven't hiked. So I'm coming to the end of that particular personal goal, and what I've been doing more of this year is actually paying attention to the citizen science, to the eBird reports, and going out specifically to see a bird I've never seen before. So this year I was able to get 3 new woodpecker species, and all of them were basically, I saw a post about where someone had seen one, and I went to that place and I looked for that bird. I didn't mean I stayed in exactly the same place, but I had one sole purpose for the trip. So I'm doing more of. But Trev's quite right. Trev was kind enough to give me a Christmas gift of 60 years of Wildlife Photographer of the Year, and all the very best photos that are ever taken by wildlife photographers around the world. Took them weeks, if not months, if not years, to actually set up that particular photo of that particular species. I mean, some people are sitting in a hide for days and days and days in the middle of winter. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But so it looks like the best photos are taken by people who take the time to stay in the same place for a long time, but do the research to make sure that that's the right place to be.
Yeah.
But hiking is fun, and
Yeah.
and hiking on the trail is fun. So
Yeah.
and you'll see lots
Absolutely.
of different things. So
It's good for you as well. That's awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that advice. So Jennifer asks, what was your most memorable moment in nature this year? Who wants to take that one?
I I think it's like the first thing I shared in this presentation was the encounter with the coyote in the morning with the deer leg in its mouth, because it was like it just built one thing on top of the other, because I was so excited to see what it was, and it was a mystery what it was. And the fact that it just happened to come my direction of all directions, and we had such a close encounter, it was just really unique, and doesn't happen very much. And it's hard in person to get photos of any kind of predator, so that was a big one for me.
yeah, I it's hard to point to one, but they all happened in the last month of the year for me, which was a surprise because usually December is like a pretty quiet month, not much to see. But I had the little tiny, like it was literally the size of my fist, the little porcupine. That was completely unexpected and quite a special moment. But I think the most magical moment was in that snowstorm with the barred owl. It actually, when I got to the spot, I was all alone. Often you get to a place, especially for owls, where there are a lot of photographers around in the Ottawa-Gatineau area. Anyway, there's sometimes little feeding frenzies of photographers, which I don't really enjoy very much. But I was all alone. The barred owl was very low on the tree and went to 4 different perches within an hour. And I was able to be there with him. And then the snow was falling, and it's just this incredibly like big flakes of snow. It was just like a very magical kind of moment.
Yeah.
Love it. And love those images. Okay, here's a question. Advice for aspiring nature lovers. How do you suggest people get started? What are the attributes of nature lovers? I guess patience, as you talked about, is one. But for people that are watching this and really would like to, start appreciation of nature, what's your suggestions of how to get started?
Go ahead, Dad.
Well, a couple of thoughts. I mean, one is just get outside. I mean, there's a debate about whether you wait for the golden hour, which is sunrise or sunset to take pictures and stuff like that. But I got advice early on from a experienced wildlife photographer who said, go out in all weather, just dress for it. But go out in all weather, and I think that that's a big part of it. If you want to be a nature lover, get out in nature. I mean, it's a simple answer, and there are trails everywhere. I mean, we have the Trans-Canada Trail. Basically, I guarantee that everyone on this call is within a very short distance of the Trans-Canada Trail. So none of us in Canada have any excuse not to get out. And not all the trail is hard to navigate. I mean, you don't have to climb up into the scree like Trev. You can actually just walk along a path and you can see lots of nature around you. So it's a simple answer, but it's just, get out there and enjoy it. The second thing I would say is a lot of this is social. I meet all kinds of other people while I'm walking on the trail, some of whom are photographers, and we have a classic greeting. It's, seen anything good yet? So there's a lot of that, but I spend a lot of my time just chatting with people that I meet about what they're experiencing. And by the way, everyone, not every single one, but almost everyone, 99.9% of the people that I meet are in a good mood.
Yes.
Smiling, they're enjoying
that's important.
And there's it's like those motorcycle people that wave to each other. It's kind of there's a thing about, we're both in nature and we know it and we know that we love it. There's a real And it's a Canadian thing as well. I mean, they do it in other countries. I get that, but there's something about being Canadian and being in nature that is that feels kind of good in your soul as well.
Yeah.
Well, that builds nicely to my next question, which is what effect does appreciating nature and spending time in nature have on both of you and your family's health and well-being?
I find it's like one of the things everybody's after, whether you're meditating or playing sports or whatever, is to live in the moment is the key thing. And I find the photography helps because I'm really paying attention to every little thing I hear, every little thing I see, but it brings you totally into the present. So that's why I encourage if people go outside, don't bring headphones or anything either, because the auditory aspect of it, I think, is such a huge part of it. But the effect it has on me, I know when like I'm guilty as anybody else of scrolling too much or spending too much time on devices, but when I spend some time in nature, it's like I'm reclaiming my brain. It's like you can feel it heal you in that way, and you regain your attention span, and you, no matter what, you feel good afterwards. So like I'm always after animals, but if I don't find any animals, I just had a beautiful walk in the woods, and that always makes your day better.
Trev said, "Don't bring your hear your headphones or your." But I do think you should bring your hearing aids if you're my age. Um, for me, I mean, I discovered I've always enjoyed being out in nature, but I discovered wildlife photography and spent a lot more time in nature at the same time that I retired from my full-time work. And for those of you that are closer to my age than Trev's, retirement it's a great time, but it's also such a massive change. I mean, I was a Type A um, leader in the not-for-profit sector for 40 years, and all of a sudden, nobody's phoning me up. I'm not getting many emails. And I discovered this at the same time. So retirement can be a time that kind of throws you for a loop and can be a bit of a mental health blow. And for me, I had this thing that I got up. I was looking forward to it with the cameras. I always felt like I could do better. I could learn more. I could meet more people. So it gives you a reason to wake up in the morning and to be excited about doing something, which was really helpful to me at my time of life.
And obviously in our case, it's proven to be a great way to connect with family because we're
Mhm.
constantly outdoors. We're sending each other our favorite shots. We're talking about what we saw and what we enjoyed and all that kind of stuff. So get out with your family as well is a good way to do it.
Absolutely. And so modeling, thank you for sharing your multi-generation story with us because modeling that for children, I mean, this is what we're trying to do at Trans Canada Trail is to inspire the next generation of trail keepers because, it's for them, it's for the next generation. So any tips on multi-generational nature appreciation?
Yeah. Well, I would say the same thing that was sort of the general answer to how do you get started, and that is to get kids out in nature. I mean, it was fantastic to bring Connor and Charlie with me. I've done it before, but not with Connor actually having what I call a real camera. So that lifted it up to another level. But just getting kids out in nature. I do some volunteer work with the school that is right beside Mud Lake, our conservation area called Regina Street Alternative School. And I meet those kids on the trail all the time when I'm going around Mud Lake. They get out to Mud Lake all the time. They are the most knowledgeable kids. I mean, I actually have done a couple of presentations, and they would raise their hand and correct me if I got it wrong. And and the reason they're knowledgeable, they're just regular kids, but they're knowledgeable because they're out there a lot with teachers who care about nature and help them interpret what they see and so on. So I think exposure is what it's all about. And I'll let Trevor talk about he has a philosophical
Oh
theory
yeah.
that really works.
So yeah, I mean, I'm bringing up a little baby and trying to figure out how to be a dad and all that kind of stuff. But a simple turn of phrase that I've thought of that works for a lot of things is contagious enthusiasm. Is I need to if I show I'm excited about nature, if my wife is really excited about nature, Hannah has no choice but to fit in and join us on this journey, right? So it's just like, and it also leads you to live your happiest life as well. If I want to be contagiously enthusiastic, then I got to do the things I love, and it happens to be being in nature is my favorite thing. So uh, just surrounding young people with people who love nature, I think it models for them a good way to live.
Absolutely. And I also like what you said, Scott, is don't let any weather deter you. I find that because the news cycle needs things to talk about, they're just talking about weather and how bad it is and stay inside all the time. And this is the best time to get out.
Totally.
Absolutely.
It's the most interesting time, and
Absolutely.
photography wise as well. If I'm taking a picture of a bird on a stick, I want it to be raining. I want it to be snowing. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Linton,
Uh,
can I jump in because I'm
Yeah.
just I just wanted to say two things, and I'm not sure whether these questions will come up, but one is I do want to give a shout out to our friend Brian Weber,
Yeah.
because the idea of doing this as a father-son fundraiser was Brian's idea during the pandemic. He said, "Why don't you do this as a father-son fundraiser?" So Brian, this was your vision. I want you to know that.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Second thing is for the technical questions, people interested in photography,
Yes. Yes.
Trevor and I have formed a photo club,
Yeah.
and we're looking for new members, particularly women photographers. And we meet every quarter, and we take a deep dive on some of our photos to learn from each other and so on. And the other members of the group are extraordinary photographers, but all of us are amateurs. We're all learning. So anyway, if you're interested in that, please let us know, because that's a way to kind of learn more about the technical side of photography, but also appreciate some really good work.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. Because
And
there
one
are
last
some
thing
questions.
one last thing is about getting out in nature. If
Yep.
you are in the Ottawa-Gatineau area, I'm happy to lead photo hikes. So if you reach out to me, we can set up some photo hikes at Mud Lake or other parts of this part of Ontario.
Great. And there are some questions about how you get started with equipment. So perhaps people can email you about that as well.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap up this evening. But I really want to thank you both for 5 years of incredible presentations and for your dedication to nature, to Trans-Canada Trail photography, and to sharing it with all of us, especially as a father-son team. We're privileged to benefit from your talent, creativity, your knowledge, and your unwavering stewardship of Canada's nature. So that wraps up our evening, but we look forward to hearing from you soon. And we can't wait for next year's presentation, hopefully. And thank you all for being here. And we are recording this presentation and we will be sending it to all of you. The donation link is in the chat. Thank you very much for all your support. And good night.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next year.